The rain poured relentlessly over the city that evening, turning streets into glistening mirrors that reflected the neon lights of skyscrapers. Inside his penthouse, William Davenport, a billionaire known for his sharp business acumen and icy demeanor, was scrolling through reports on his tablet, the faint hum of the city below barely reaching him. Deals were his life, numbers were his language, and emotions, well, he'd long decided they were a liability. But tonight, something tugged at him that he couldn't quite name. Earlier that day, a minor scandal had erupted in his company. One of his board members had leaked a sensitive deal to a rival, and his temper had flared in ways that had made even his closest assistants nervous. The room smelled faintly of expensive cologne, polished wood, and the lingering stress of corporate warfare. He had a dinner meeting in an hour with investors, and yet his mind kept wandering back to a fleeting memory from lunch. The image of his maid, Alex, standing outside the staff entrance, drenched in rain, shivering but defiantly eating her meal. Alex wasn't new to the mansion. She had been with the Davenport household for over 3 years. Quiet, efficient, and unassuming, she moved through the house like a shadow, always present yet never demanding attention. William had always admired her work ethic, though he would never admit it aloud, and often took her diligence for granted. But that day, something was different. Something about seeing her eat outside in the rain, under the gray sky, brought an unfamiliar warmth to his chest, a feeling he hadn't recognized in years. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just concern for an employee, but deep down he knew it was more than that. Curiosity gnawed at him. He hadn't expected it, and part of him resented the distraction, yet he couldn't stop thinking about Alex. By mid-afternoon, he found himself slipping out of his office, letting the usual security protocols slide. He told his assistant he had an errand and left the building, the rain immediately soaking him as he stepped onto the street. His tailored suit offered no protection, and the wind tugged at his umbrella as if mocking him, but he barely noticed. He was scanning the staff area of the mansion's grounds, half expecting the image to vanish into memory. And then he saw her. Alex was sitting on the low stone ledge by the service entrance, knees pulled close to her chest, a modest tray of food on her lap. She hadn't noticed him. The rain ran in thin streams along her hair, her simple uniform clinging to her, yet she ate steadily, almost defiantly. Her lips moved silently as she chewed, and he saw the faintest flicker of discomfort in her eyes as the cold bit into her skin. No one had ever seen her like this, not as a servant, not as a background character in the grand life of the Davenport mansion. She looked human, vulnerable, yet remarkably resilient. William's heart, a muscle long hardened by deals and betrayals, skipped. He realized he had never truly seen her before. Not really. He had seen her moving through the halls, organizing, cleaning, serving, but never like this, never raw, never real. His feet moved forward almost of their own accord, and before he knew it, he was standing under the shelter of the awning near her, the raindrops plastering his hair and jacket. She finally looked up, eyes widening in surprise, and for a moment, neither spoke. "Mr. Davenport," she said finally, her voice tinged with a mix of politeness and mild panic. She started to stand, trying to appear composed, but he gestured for her to remain seated. He crouched slightly, close enough to see the steam rising from her modest meal. "Why are you out here in the rain?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral, though he felt the strangest urge to wrap her in his own coat, an impulse he immediately chastised himself for thinking. Alex blinked, hesitated, and then said simply, "I didn't want to waste my lunch in the kitchen while the others were busy. I thought I'd eat quickly out here." Her words were casual, but the truth lay beneath them. The pride, the independence, the sheer determination to keep going despite discomfort. William felt an unfamiliar pang of guilt, realizing that in all his wealth, all his resources, he had never thought to provide for her comfort in moments like this. He swallowed, words caught somewhere between businesslike authority and something softer he had never allowed himself. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Come inside. You can eat somewhere dry." Alex hesitated, her gaze dropping to the tray. "It's fine. Really." He frowned, a part of him frustrated by her resilience. No one had ever defied him in this quiet, unassuming way before. Most people cowered or flattered. She simply ate her meal in the rain. There was something profoundly humbling about it. He felt an emotion he hadn't recognized in years. Admiration, perhaps, mingled with guilt, perhaps even a hint of longing. The rain intensified, and he made a decision. Without thinking about the rules, the staff, or his reputation, he stepped closer and lifted the tray. "Let me carry that for you," he said, surprising even himself. Alex's eyes widened again, and she stammered something that sounded like protest, but he waved it off, his hands steady despite the storm. As he led her inside, the warmth of the mansion enveloped them, the contrast with the rain outside stark and almost theatrical. For the first time, he saw Alex differently, not as a maid, not as a background fixture of his life, but as someone alive, someone worthy of care, someone whose quiet dignity demanded respect. And in that moment, something inside William Davenport shifted, a realization that wealth could not buy empathy, and that the smallest acts of humanity could awaken even the most hardened hearts. By the time he handed her tray to a small table near the window, rain dripping from his shoulders, he noticed her looking at him with a mixture of surprise and tentative trust. He returned to his usual composure, clearing his throat, but the warmth lingered in his chest, stubborn and undeniable. Tonight, a seed had been planted, one that would grow in ways he could never have predicted. And outside, the storm raged on, but inside, a small spark of change had been lit, one that neither money nor power could extinguish. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the city streets glistening under a pale, timid sun. William Davenport sat in his office, staring at the window but seeing nothing of the skyline or the bustling city below. Instead, his mind kept returning to the previous evening. The image of Alex, small and resolute, eating in the rain, her quiet dignity embedded in his memory like a photograph he could not erase. He had pored over countless business reports, made phone calls that decided the fates of hundreds of employees, yet none of it had tugged at him like that single, fleeting moment. The office door opened softly, and his assistant, Caroline, entered with her usual polished demeanor. "Sir, you have the board meeting in 30 minutes, she said, glancing at the stack of papers he had already signed a dozen times. "Everything's ready." "I'll be there," he replied automatically, his voice carrying the usual edge of authority. But Caroline paused, sensing a subtle shift in him. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, a note of curiosity in her tone. William hesitated. The truth was something he couldn't articulate yet. It wasn't a business concern, not a deal, not a contract. It was something human, fragile, and completely outside his usual domain. "Yes, just thinking," he said finally, dismissing her with a wave. Caroline left, and he returned to the window, the memory of Alex in the rain pressing insistently against the walls he had built around himself. By mid-morning, he found himself wandering the mansion in a way he had never allowed himself before. Usually, the estate operated like a well-oiled machine, each servant in their assigned role, every corner maintained to perfection, every movement efficient. But today, William walked past the grand dining room, the gleaming floors, and the polished silverware with none of his usual urgency. He was searching, not for reports, not for investors, but for Alex. He found her in the kitchen, methodically preparing breakfast for the staff. Her movements were precise, quiet, and unassuming, but to him, they now carried a weight he could not ignore. He cleared his throat, making his presence known. Alex turned, startled at first, then composed herself instantly, her expression neutral. "Good morning, Mr. Davenport," she said, bowing slightly in her usual manner. "Good morning," he replied, though his voice lacked its usual firmness. "Alex, I wanted to apologize." Her eyes flickered with curiosity, but she didn't speak, waiting for him to continue. "For last night," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture he rarely made in front of anyone. "You shouldn't have had to eat out there in the rain. It was thoughtless of me, of the staff. I should have." He stopped himself, realizing that words felt inadequate. I should have made sure you were comfortable. Alex's lips pressed into a thin line, not in anger, but in restraint. She had been treated kindly by employers before, but sincerity had always been rare. "Thank you, sir," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "But it's all right. I'm used to it." Something in his chest tightened, a mix of guilt and admiration. She was accustomed to hardship, yet she carried herself with a quiet grace he could hardly comprehend. He wanted to tell her more, to explain that this wasn't just a moment of concern, but the stirrings of something deeper, something that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. But the words stuck in his throat, and he simply nodded. "Alex," he said after a pause, "I'd like you to join me for lunch today." Inside, her eyebrows rose slightly. "Lunch, sir?" "Yes," he said firmly, but with a gentleness that was foreign to him. "I want to talk about yesterday and everything else." For a moment, Alex hesitated, caught between surprise and the natural reserve she had maintained all these years. But then she nodded, her curiosity piqued, and returned to her duties with a subtle but noticeable shift in her posture, as if the acknowledgement had validated her presence in ways money and power never had. By noon, they were seated in a private dining room overlooking the mansion gardens. The room was lavish, yet the atmosphere between them was not stiff or formal. It was cautious, tentative, yet charged with a tension William could neither ignore nor fully understand. He watched as Alex set her tray before her, her movements careful but deliberate, and he realized he had never truly observed her before. Not really. He had seen her as part of the furniture, part of the routine. But now, every gesture seemed purposeful, every glance meaningful. "I wanted to understand," he began, breaking the silence. "Why did you eat outside? Why not wait in the staff lounge?" Alex paused, fork hovering midair. "Because," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm, "sometimes people just want a little space, even when it's inconvenient." Her words struck him harder than he expected. They weren't just about food or rain. They were about dignity, about independence, about standing firm in one's choices despite circumstances. He realized that his life, with all its wealth and power, had never required that kind of resilience. He felt a pang of shame for having overlooked the humanity of those around him, for having allowed his own life of comfort to blind him to the quiet struggles of others. "Alex," he said slowly, "you're remarkable. I don't say that lightly. I want to do better. For you, for everyone who works here." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, he thought he saw something, gratitude, yes, but also cautious hope. She had been seen, truly seen, in a way few ever had. And in that moment, something shifted irreversibly within him. He wanted to protect her, to care for her, to ensure that she never had to eat in the rain again. But more than that, he wanted to understand her world, to bridge the gap that money and status had created. They talked for nearly an hour, discussing not just yesterday, but life, ambitions, and the subtle injustices that often went unnoticed in a world ruled by wealth. William listened, genuinely listened, and for the first time in decades, he felt the stirrings of empathy in a raw, unfiltered form. Alex spoke of her family, her dreams, the small joys and hidden sorrows that made her who she was, and he realized that he had been blind to a richness far greater than any fortune he possessed. By the time lunch ended, the rain outside had returned, tapping gently against the window panes. William felt a strange reluctance to return to his office, to the world of contracts and cold calculations. Something inside him had awakened, something that demanded connection, understanding, and the recognition that even a billionaire could be moved by simple human courage. As Alex left the room to return to her duties, William found himself watching her walk away, her figure small, yet commanding in its quiet strength. He knew, without fully understanding how, that the encounter would change him, that the image of her eating in the rain was no longer just a fleeting memory. It was a call, a spark, a beginning. And deep inside, he sensed that his life, structured and precise for so long, was about to shift in ways he could never have anticipated. Over the next few days, William found himself noticing Alex in ways he hadn't before. It wasn't just the efficiency with which she managed her tasks or the subtle grace in her movements. It was the way she carried herself despite challenges, the quiet strength in her eyes, and the small acts of kindness she performed without expecting recognition. Each observation pulled at something deep within him, a part of himself he had long buried beneath contracts, numbers, and the relentless pursuit of success. It started subtly. He began leaving small notes of appreciation on her tray. Nothing extravagant, just words acknowledging her effort. Thank you, or a you are remarkable. At first, Alex barely reacted, maintaining her professional distance. But gradually, he noticed her glancing at the notes with something like a soft smile, the corners of her lips turning upward just slightly. She didn't speak of it, but William saw it in the way her eyes lingered on the paper, in the tiny tilt of her head, in the momentary lightness in her step. One evening, a sudden downpour caught them both by surprise. William had been working late, reviewing proposals in his office, when he heard a soft knock at the door. Alex stood there, drenched, holding a stack of files she needed him to review. He gestured for her to come in, quickly retrieving a towel to dry her hair and shoulders. She tried to protest, insisting she was fine, but he ignored her, brushing the water off her uniform with a gentleness he had never shown anyone before. "You're always so careful for everyone else," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Why not for yourself?" Alex hesitated, caught off guard by the personal nature of his remark. Then, in her usual composed manner, she said, "Because it's easier to focus on others. People's needs are clearer than their feelings." William stared at her, feeling an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He realized that what he admired most about her wasn't just her diligence or strength. It was her heart, her ability to care deeply even when the world often overlooked her. He found himself wanting to protect that heart, to ensure that no hardship, no matter how small, could dampen her spirit. As the days turned into weeks, William began to seek Alex's presence more consciously. He found excuses to interact with her beyond the formalities of work. Sometimes it was a casual question about her day. Other times it was a genuine conversation about dreams and ambitions. Alex, cautious but perceptive, gradually allowed herself to respond with more than just courtesy. She began sharing small fragments of her life outside the mansion. The books she read, the simple joys of her neighborhood, the dreams she harbored quietly in the evenings after a long day of work. One afternoon, William found himself walking with her in the mansion gardens, a rare moment of privacy. The sun filtered through the clouds, casting soft light on the manicured lawns and blooming flowers. Alex spoke of her younger brother, of the struggles her family faced, and of the resilience they had built together. William listened, utterly captivated, realizing that despite his wealth and power, he had never truly known struggle, and perhaps had never truly lived. "Do you ever feel trapped?" he asked her gently, after a pause, his eyes following her as she examined a flower with delicate fingers. Alex looked at him, a shadow crossing her features. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it's not the kind of trap you think. It's expectations. People see you one way and forget that you have your own path, your own desires." Her words resonated with him profoundly. William had spent decades trapped by his own expectations, by the roles he had been forced to play as a son, as a businessman, as a billionaire. And now, standing there beside Alex, he understood that freedom wasn't about wealth or power. It was about the courage to live authentically, to honor one's own heart amidst the noise of the world. That evening, as rain returned softly, they found themselves seeking shelter under the veranda. The sound of the falling droplets created a rhythm, a quiet music that seemed to echo the unspoken connection forming between them. William noticed Alex, shivering slightly, and instinctively draped his coat over her shoulders. She looked at him, startled by the gesture, but didn't move away. "You don't have to do that," she said softly, her voice barely above the rain. "I want to," he replied simply, the words carrying a sincerity he had rarely spoken aloud. For a long moment, they stood there, the silence filled not with awkwardness, but with understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of something neither had fully named yet. William realized that this moment, simple yet profound, had begun to awaken feelings he had buried for so long. Feelings of care, of protection, of admiration, and perhaps something deeper he was only beginning to comprehend. Later that night, alone in his study, William stared at the city skyline, but could see nothing beyond Alex's image. He replayed each interaction, each fleeting smile, each subtle expression, and felt a warmth in his chest he could not explain. He had built walls around his heart to survive the world of power and privilege. But now, those walls seemed porous, vulnerable, ready to crumble in the presence of someone who saw the world, not as a series of transactions, but as a web of human connections. Meanwhile, Alex, in her modest quarters, found herself thinking about William as well. She had noticed the subtle shifts in him, the softening of his tone, the genuine curiosity in his questions, the rare glimpses of vulnerability beneath the billionaire exterior. She had always been careful to maintain distance, to protect herself from the complexities of his world, yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt, the sense that something meaningful was unfolding between them. Unbeknownst to both, their lives were gradually intertwining in ways neither could have predicted. The barriers of status, wealth, and societal expectation were beginning to erode, replaced by mutual respect, understanding, and the stirrings of something more profound. The world outside continued its relentless pace, with deals, deadlines, and expectations pressing in from every side, but within the quiet moments they shared, a new story was being written. One of empathy, courage, and the awakening of a billionaire's heart to the simple, undeniable truths of humanity. It was a week later when the moment that would change everything finally arrived. The city had been battered by heavy storms for days, and William found himself in his office, reviewing reports with a mind only half on the numbers in front of him. His thoughts kept returning to Alex, to the quiet strength she had shown, and to the small, powerful way she had started to awaken something inside him that he had thought was long buried. The memory of her eating in the rain, alone and unacknowledged, was now a recurring image, vivid and impossible to ignore. That evening, as the storm intensified, William decided to check on the mansion staff personally. He walked through the corridors, the polished floors reflecting the dim light, and found Alex moving quickly through the kitchen, distributing hot drinks to the other staff. Her hair was damp, clinging to her face, and her uniform showed signs of a day's work. Yet her movements were precise and graceful. She didn't notice him at first, so focused was she on ensuring everyone else was comfortable. "Alex," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, eyes wide for a moment, then composed herself. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging outside. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, stepping closer. "I want to make sure you're okay, really okay." Alex hesitated, sensing the unusual intensity in his tone, and then nodded. He led her to a quieter room at the back of the mansion, a small lounge rarely used by anyone except visiting guests. The rain pounded against the windows, creating a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the tension between them. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. "You've been working tirelessly, and I can't ignore it any longer. I saw you last week, in the rain, eating alone, and I realized I've been blind to the human side of my life, blind to the people who make this place run." Alex's expression softened slightly, though she kept her gaze lowered. "Sir, No," he interrupted gently. "Let me finish. I can't just say it. I have to show it. You've reminded me of something I thought I'd lost: empathy, care, and the importance of seeing people, truly seeing them." For a moment, silence fell between them. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside William, an emotional torrent he could no longer suppress. He noticed the faint shiver in Alex's shoulders and, without thinking, draped his coat over her once again. This time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of surprise and an unspoken understanding. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. I want to, he replied firmly. And not just because of the rain. Because I realize now that you matter. Not just as someone who works here, but as someone whose life, dignity, and presence demand respect. Alex's lips parted slightly, and she opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she looked down at her hands, trembling just slightly, and for the first time, William saw the vulnerability beneath her strength. He reached out, gently taking her hands in his. The warmth of his touch was surprising to both of them, a silent bridge forming between two hearts that had long remained separate. "Alex," he said, his voice low and uncharacteristically sincere, "you've awakened something in me that I didn't know I was capable of feeling. You've reminded me that wealth, power, and control mean nothing without human connection, without compassion. I want to change. I want to be better." Tears welled up in her eyes, unbidden and unstoppable. She had spent years being overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated. And yet, here was the billionaire, the man whose world had seemed untouchable and cold, standing before her, vulnerable and honest. She had expected judgment, distance, or patronizing words, but instead, she felt seen, understood, and respected. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling, "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," he whispered. "Just know that your courage, your dignity, and your kindness have changed me. Seeing you in the rain, it awakened me. And I don't want to lose this chance to see the world differently, to see people differently." Alex looked at him, and in that moment, all the barriers between them seemed to dissolve. It wasn't romance, not yet, not entirely. It was recognition, respect, and the raw, undeniable truth of shared humanity. The storm outside had become a mere backdrop to the storm of emotions now raging in the room. Guilt, admiration, awe, and the fragile beginnings of connection. For a long time, they sat in silence, hands still lightly touching, each absorbing the significance of the moment. William realized that he had been living in a world of facades, where appearances mattered more than reality, and where wealth often blinded people to the truths of those around them. Alex, for her part, understood that sometimes even the most powerful hearts could be awakened by the simplest acts of courage and dignity. Finally, Alex spoke, her voice steadier now. "Thank you, Mr. Davenport. Not just for the coat or the words, but for seeing me, really seeing me." William nodded, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "No, thank you, Alex, for reminding me that life isn't just about deals, power, or money. It's about people. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one simple, honest moment, to change everything." The rain began to lighten outside, the first streaks of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It felt symbolic, a reflection of the clearing storm in their hearts. William felt a sense of relief, release, and something akin to hope, a hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. As Alex returned to her duties, William lingered by the window, watching her move through the mansion with quiet strength. He knew that the awakening he had felt wasn't fleeting. It had changed him irrevocably. And he also knew that their connection, born in the rain, nurtured by respect and empathy, was only just beginning. That night, as he sat alone in his office, William made a silent promise to himself to never again take for granted the humanity of those around him, to recognize courage and dignity wherever he found it, and to honor the small, powerful moments that awaken the heart. And somewhere deep inside, he felt a certainty he had never known before, that seeing Alex in the rain had not only changed the way he viewed the world, but had changed the very way he viewed himself.